Profile is presented by Inns Group, Insurance and Benefits. I'm Greg Scheinman, and this is Profile. So, who is Patrick Henry?
I guess a very fortunate and blessed person. I've just really lived a great life and had dear friends and family that have been supportive of what I wanted to do and to fulfill all my dreams. So I'm just a very fortunate person.
Can you take me through your upbringing and your background? I know you're very close with your family.
Well, my dad worked for the Santa Fe Railroad for 41 years, and so in those 41 years, not while I was alive, but in our 41 years, we were transferred 30 times. So it was kind of like a military family that we were moving constantly across the U.S. to different cities when my dad got transferred during the railroad days. So I've lived in a lot of places, always along the railroad. So I just had a great life growing up. I've always loved trains because my dad worked for the railroad. I loved sports, so going to different schools and getting into the sporting programs at schools never bothered me, and I just really enjoyed my upbringing of seeing so much of the U.S.
Tell me about how you took this family of yours that was raised, being part of the train business. How did you turn that into your own hobby and your own passion?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. When I was growing up, my dad had a private railroad car on the Santa Fe Railroad, and every summer when kids would go to camp or kids would go to Disneyland, our family would get on his private train car and travel with him on business across the country. And so I basically in the summer months lived on a train car, private train car. And I just loved it. I just loved every bit about whether seeing trains, meeting conductors and engineers, having great meals on his private car fixed by a chef on board. And I just loved that lifestyle. And when my dad retired in the late 70s, we no longer had a private car, access to a private car. And boy, that was culture shock to me. I wasn't used to that. And I just had a dream from that day on that someday I would love to be able to either rent one or charter one and have our whole family do another trip again. And so I just love the thought of possibly one day having the dream to own a private car.
And now you have two of them, correct?
I lost my head. I just wanted one, but when I saw these, I actually had rented these two cars, gosh, 15 years ago, 18 years ago for a trip, a small trip in Chicago, and I just fell in love with them. And for the next 15 years, I literally, in the back of my mind, I thought someday I really want to own those cars if it's possible. And then fortunately, 5 years ago, the gentleman that owned them decided he wanted to sell them, and I got in touch with him and bought them and brought them to Houston and refurbished them, and just having the time of my life traveling on them.
Patrick Henry Creative Promotions. Tell me about how you started your company.
Many years ago, gosh, it's been over 20 years ago, I was in the spirits business. I worked for a local liquor distributorship company, and I was calling on restaurants. And all the restaurants that I would call on in Southwest Houston or West Houston would always say, boy, we're looking for ideas. It's not so much the spirit brands we're carrying, but we're looking for new and creative ideas. And so I started just off the top of my head giving them ideas when I was in the beverage business, and some of the ideas were pretty decent and worked, and I realized that maybe I had a little niche there. And shortly after that, a chain here in town, an entertainment chain, restaurants, called me and said, would you like to come over and start doing our marketing and promotions? We somewhat were impressed with what you did for us on your ideas, and would you want to do it full time for us? So I jumped at the chance and started creating promotions. I became a marketing director for a chain of restaurants and clubs. I was in my mid-30s, and I thought to myself, we had some high energy clubs, and fortunately I thought ahead of time thinking I don't want to be 50 years old one day doing promotions in nightclubs. So In my mid-30s, I left this chain of restaurants and clubs and went and got experience in the hotel business for a year, because I realized if I was ever going to do something and start my own company of marketing and promotions, I needed to understand the hotel business too. And so I spent a year in the hotel business as a marketing director, and then I got a call, and I was just in the right place at the right time. I got a call from a gentleman in Atlanta that had a big, huge convention for restaurants and nightclubs and hotels, and said, you've been recommended, would you like to come over here and speak? And I had never in my life spoken in front of people. And so I went over to Atlanta, and I think I spoke in front of maybe 200 people. I was a nervous wreck, basket case speaking, but I gave them ideas that I had come up with over the years. And I was inundated after the conference about, hey, we would love for you to come see us and come up with some ideas. So that's when I thought, well, I'm just going to roll the dice and start my own promotion marketing company and see how it goes. I started literally in my dining room garage and created it in-house. And what I did is I created a newsletter, and this newsletter was called Promotion News, and it had great ideas for bars and restaurants. And my thought is, the day I started my company, well, I'll create this newsletter. It'll be a monthly newsletter. I'll charge $300 a year, with the idea of if an owner or operator just got one great idea out of this newsletter, it would pay for itself, because they would increase their sales, twofold. So I was so proud of this newsletter. I went to another conference, spoke at it, thought, well, on the plane, I thought, gosh, I'll sell 1,000 subscriptions at $300, and I'm going to be a very well-off man. Well, reality set in. I went to the conference. It was only attended by maybe 100 people, and I sold one subscription. And I did that at a discount, $150. And I came back, and over the next 2 or 3 months, I only sold maybe another 10 subscriptions. But I kept sending it out monthly, and it was 4 or 5 pages, color. I didn't even have a computer. I was renting a typewriter from a local rental place every week for $35, bringing the typewriter home, staying up all night writing this, and then taking it to a printer for them to print it. Well, what happened after I got maybe 30 or 40 subscriptions over the next year or so, which obviously wasn't paying the bills, everybody was calling saying, well, I read your newsletter, I really like it, but I prefer you to come to Louisville, or I prefer you to come to Chicago, sit down with us and walk us through these promotions or give us ideas. So before I knew it, I had a lot of people calling saying, will you come see us, instead of just sending us the newsletter. And I was very fortunate that a hotel chain in Dallas called, and then a restaurant chain in Phoenix, Arizona called and said, we'd like to hire you full-time on a retainer. And all of a sudden, the business started booming, and I didn't have to buy the typewriter anymore. I was able to finally get a computer, but I did it out of my house for the first 5 years.
Do you follow a particular routine every day?
I usually try to be out on the streets running by 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then I piddle, is what I call it. I sit around after I run and kind of plan my day at the office and everything, and then go into the office and put in a full day, and then usually go home or go out to eat. Now, I do travel over 100,000 miles a year in the air, and probably another 20,000 on the train. So most of my life's on an airplane or on a train.